For this exercise, we're going to be looking at some pretty cool advanced selection techniques that Photoshop provides. These are fairly new. They've only been around for a couple of years. They're using a lot of, you could call, artificial intelligence. You can use, all sorts of fancy names to call these things. But ultimately, the way these things work is Photoshop analyzes the image, and based on what it interprets the image to be, can make some pretty good decisions and automatic selections. So the demonstration I'm going to use for this is an image in your weekly files called image. We'll go with IMG 2152 for our demonstration here, and click to open. There you go. Now what we're seeing here is a fairly complex image in terms of making selections. So there are some areas that are easy. For example, the nice sharp contrast edge along the sleeve here with the background makes it fairly easy to have Photoshop make a selection. Same thing with the profile. The contrast between the background over here and the facial features. It gets a little tricky in here where you can see maybe there's not enough contrast between the hair and this color, and then you have the brick, and of course hair is the hardest, hair and fur, the hardest things to create selections with because there's so many fine details, and the background blends through all these fine little details, making it extremely hard to not make it look like it's cut out of a magazine with some blunt scissors. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. We want to blend the hair, and the reason why we want to remove the background sometimes is we want to do a photo composite and change the location, whatever. For example, if we want a beach scene over here or some other backdrop, we would need to isolate the subject from the background, and it's probably one of the most popular things that's demanded of a Photoshop artist, whether it's for e-commerce, making sure that the products are isolated from the background, or fashion, where you are shooting in a studio and you have gear behind you, you just want to focus on the model, etc. So this is a very complex task, and Photoshop has done a great job creating some tools to help keep it very simple. Now, the first thing we want to do is probably turn this background flat image into its own layer. So I'm going to double click that layer, and it gives me this pop-up over here. The name is layer 0. We'll call this subject. Oops. The subject. Color none, mode normal, all good, 100%, click OK. And now what we've done is we've turned this into a floating layer. So it's moving over the background, which is completely transparent. Now what we want to do next is something cool. We want to go to select, and from this list over here, we want to choose subject. We can choose focus area, but that's a different type of thing we'll look at later. But for now, subject is more accurate to what we want to do here. So let's click there, and you can see Photoshop is processing, studying the image. And when it's done, it creates this automatic selection around what it thinks is the image. And that includes the hair with all these little details over here. So if you want to see the extent to how well it does it, we can click on select again and click on select and mask. This is the advanced selection panel here. Okay. Now what it does is it drops out the background, and you can see all the details that it has selected automatically. However, you can actually use this panel over here to fine-tune these selections. Okay, so let's look at this panel very quickly here. The view mode allows you to see the subject and the selection in different ways, so you can better evaluate how good the selection is. For example, if you just want to see black and white, you can see that even though you don't see this being selected, the gray shows that there's some being picked up. Overlay shows you again. Let me zoom out a bit so you can see. Let me zoom out here so you can see what that preview looks like when you activate it, and it allows you to go in real close and see how well those selections work. Extremely well in this case. Or you can view it on black or white, depending on what your new backdrop is going to look like. Usually I go with onion skin, and the transparency you can change so you can see a little bit of the background. If I know I'm going to be using a darker background, I'll probably switch it to black. And then you can change the opacity to see how it would look on black. Now the danger with doing that is that you want to make sure you don't get like a white outline around your subject, because that happens a lot. And if you're going to be putting it on a white background, again there too, you want to make sure you're not going to have any elements like a dark outline around the shirt. Here's a perfect example, right? So if I'm putting this against the white background, this is going to be a bit of a problem for me. So I can now change the edges of the selection to fine-tune some of the settings here. So I can smooth it out a bit. I could try feathering it a little bit. But what I probably want to do, shift edge, right? So I want to bring the edge in a bit tighter to not have the black background. I'm going to shift the edge a little bit, see if we can eliminate it. Now what's cool here is, even if it's not perfect, we can grab some tools here and tighten things up a little bit. So this is the Refine Edge brush tool, and here it allows you to expand the area or restores the original edge, and this is your brush size. So again, this is the kind of thing you want to zoom in a little bit, and if I choose the expand and I brush it here, you can see that it's taking in maybe a bit more of the background, smoothing things out. If you choose contract, you could change the brush size to 20 maybe. Right, so here's your brush size. This is how hard or soft you want the edges. Don't touch the rest, this is good enough. So you can do some fine tuning there and clean a few things up. Same thing with the hair. If you want to touch up that area here, you can brush it in. And sometimes you want to switch back to here so you can see what's cooking a bit better. Now I'm not going to play with this too much. You can tool around with this, and when you're done, just click OK. So there's your selection. With that selection made, what you want to do is select the inverse. Now we have our subject selected. We want to invert the selection, meaning that it's the wall and the background that's selected. And now you can click on Add Layer Mask. Whoops, mistake. No need to inverse. Just go Add Layer Mask, and the background disappears. And the background is still there, it's just hidden behind that mask that we see here in the mask icon on the layer panel. If we want to bring it back, we'll do a separate exercise on working with masks later on. But right now we got what we wanted. We got a perfectly selected subject. And what we can do is open a different background, for example. And rather than opening it and pasting it in, what we're going to do is we're going to place embedded. By placing it, it knows to add it directly into this existing document. And what we want to do here is you want to stretch it out a bit, so at least it's nice and big, and press enter, and there it is. Now what you're seeing here is what's called a smart object. We're going to get into those probably in a later class, but smart objects allow you to shrink them and enlarge them without any loss in quality, for one thing, and that's what we kind of want. So press enter to apply it, and what we want to do is bring this into the background. So you can drag this layer, click, and drag it to put it behind the subject. And now you can position it, you can rotate it, and these operate as two separate entities. The reason that's good, watch this. I'll select the mask, and with the mask selected, I'm going to change my, let's go with levels. Now don't be freaked out if you have no idea what this panel does. We'll get into it at some point. But what it allows you to do, oops, let me undo. So click on the layer mask, and with it selected, hold down the control key, and you'll see a little icon up here, a little marquee tool, and when you click it, it'll reload that selection. And now with that selection, you can add a new adjustment layer called levels. Levels allow you to change the tonal quality of an image, and because it's using that layer mask, it's only affecting the subject, not the background. So you can fine-tune some of the features here. You can lighten things up, darken things up. It's up to you. And there it is. That's a quick way to work with subjects and masking, which is very, very powerful. And we'll get into a bit more in depth at some point.